No further background. Every day, the actions taken to ensure national security protect many's safety and ability to carry out their lives unhindered. However, every day the threat of terrorism lurks just behind, grabbing at every chance to inhibit the normalcy of our lives. It is because I believe that terrorism is a greater threat to our ability to act freely that I stand resolved. That when in conflict, national security ought to be valued above individual privacy. Now, before we begin, let's first clear up what I exactly mean when I'm referring to national security. I would like to agree with national security, I believe, is the protection of the interest of a country as a whole. So in the U.S., the interest of our country and our government encompass many things. Valuing national security recognizes that while personal privacy is important, most important is being alive and well and free from oppression to enjoy that privacy. Because of this view, my goal for today's round is liberty, which means that whichever side better upholds the concepts of liberty should win today's round. Now, according to Oxford Dictionaries, liberty is the state of being free within a society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. So when we value liberty, we value the freedom of oppression. Freedom from oppression. So this leads me to my first reason to vote for the negative side in today's debate. Contention 1 is that terrorism inhibits liberty. Terrorism inhibits liberty. Terrorism is currently at the top of the national security agenda and in many ways is a threat to liberties globally. According to an article from the Terrorism Research Initiative, quote, "The first and most immediate effects of terrorism are psychological. Terrorist campaigns can be expected to psychologically affect a sizable portion of the population of a targeted society, either directly by harming a person or their family, or indirectly through extensive media coverage of terrorist attacks. The greater number of attacks and the more lethal those attacks are, the more people that will be psychologically affected by them. Terrorism is a form of psychological warfare against a society. It is designed to strike fear into the heart of the targeted society, and it generally succeeds in doing so." Unquote. Now, the article goes on to say that not only the obvious effects of terror to directly take lives, but also the indirect. So the economic consequences of destruction that it brings, and the political and social ramifications as people react to the events. Terrorism is a barrier to our liberty. It is both a thief to lives and a hindrance to our rights. In order to avoid the oppression of liberty that terrorism brings, we must prioritize national security in order to protect our liberty. This leads me to my second reason, which is that when in conflict, national security valued above individual privacy prevents terror. In 2005, Kevin James, alleged founder of the terror group JIS, along with members Levar Haley Washington, Gregory Patterson, and Hamad Reyes Samana, were arrested and charged with conspiring to attack National Guard facilities, synagogues, and other targets in the Los Angeles area. The object of the conspiracy was to, quote, "kill as many people as possible who were present at the locations," according to Washington's plea agreement. As a part of financing the JIS operation, members Washington and Patterson robbed at least 10 gas stations. Both were eventually arrested after Patterson dropped his cell phone at one scene in July of 2005. Police were then able to link the robberies to the group's terror plot only after the authorities searched Washington and Patterson's apartment, where they discovered a handwritten document titled "Modes of Attack," detailing the addresses of each location they planned to attack, jihadi literature, maps, bulletproof vest, and a shotgun and rifle. This is one of a multitude of instances where an attack that could have ended in hurt many lives was prevented because of a recognition that in order to protect the liberty of many, we must inconvenience a few. So now that we've established how terrorism is actually the biggest barrier to our liberties, thus to our rights and to our lives, and how valuing national security above individual privacy when the two are in conflict is necessary to stopping terror attacks, let's directly take a look at some of the arguments that the affirmative side brought up in their first speech. So the first point, one thing that they mentioned is that our rights exist even when our nation's security is at risk. And I would agree, when our nation's security is at risk, we can still have rights. But what about when we actually are facing a danger to our nation? What about after the event of a terror attack in which people are killed or injured or their rights are inhibited in some other way? In that case, our rights are not protected. Our rights have been taken away, whether it's the right to life or our right to think a certain way or act a certain way. So in these instances of specifically terror attacks, our rights are not conserved and they do not exist, which is why we need to value national security higher in order to prevent these things from occurring. So yes, our rights do exist when our nation is at risk, but they don't exist when those risks actually come into, actually manifest themselves in our nation. The second point was that he mentioned our right to remain silent, and that warrants and consents are legal violations of privacy, and therefore they're still respecting the right to privacy. But according to his own definition that he brought up in his speech, privacy was the freedom to act in a certain way, if I remember correctly. It was our freedom to choose. So the negative team's stance on this is that regardless of whether you violate someone's privacy legally or illegally, it's still a violation of privacy. You're still going against that person's will to be separate or to be in a certain way. And regardless of whether it's legal or illegal, it's still a violation of privacy. And it's for that reason that I strongly encourage a negative ballot at the end of today's round. Thanks, and I now stand open for cross-examination.
Ready?
Yes.
All right, me too.
Yes.
Great. My first question for you is, can Geico really save me 15% or more on car insurance?
I don't know.
Okay, great. In that case, let's take a look first at your second contention. I'm sorry, no, I do definition of liberty. You were essentially saying that liberty is important and national security helps us secure liberty because terrorists take away our liberty. Is that correct?
Well, what I was saying basically is that liberty is being free from restrictions. So in order to have liberty, we must have life and we must have our rights. And we need to balance the two in order to keep that. Okay,
great. So let's take a look. What was your definition of liberty?
Liberty was from Oxford Dictionaries. It said, the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views.
Okay. Now, do you do you consider terrorists to have authority over you?
If in the event of attack where they were, if they kill people, they have essentially authority over them because they're determining something about that person's life.
Okay, so just in general, if terrorists do something to our life, then do they have authority over us? Or do something to our country, that they have authority over our country?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Okay, now in your second contention, I believe that you talked about some people who had this conspiracy of wanting to attack a lot of places. And essentially the police found out about them by by searching their apartment. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, first they actually found one of the members' phone at the site, and they looked at that, and then from that they were led to the apartment where they found the incriminating evidence.
Okay, now when they searched this apartment, did they have a search warrant? Do you know?
The article doesn't say, but it was a violation of their privacy.
It was a violation. Okay. Do you plan? Oh, okay. Will you be 18 by the general election?
Yes.
Do you plan to vote?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you have the right to vote?
Do I have the right to vote? Yes.
Okay. So, does that right to vote mean that you have to vote?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Now, when you cast a ballot in the box, is that actually your right, or is that an action?
Well, it's your right to do so, but you can choose whether or not to exercise that right.
Okay, great. Now, as long as we're talking about the choice, if a police officer was to come to your house, just personally, would you want them to come in without a warrant?
Probably not.
Okay. If they asked if they could come in, would you want them to actually ask before barging in, like, for you to say yes or no?
I would feel better if they asked.
Okay, great. Now, let's just say, I doubt this would ever happen, but let's just say that you were arrested. Would you want the police officers to read you your Miranda rights and say that you had the right to an attorney, the right to remain silent, and so on and so forth?
Yes.
Okay, and just specifically, do you want to, even if they don't remind you, do you want to have the right to remain silent?
Yes, I would.
Okay, and would you say that the right to remain silent does stem from the right to privacy?
Could you repeat that question?
Would you say that the right to privacy includes the right to remain silent?
Yes, I would.
Okay, great. No further questions.